WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore positive. I got to hold my lottery tickets up if I can find them, and they're already in my bag because I'm in my bag every day. We're doing 31 crab cakes in 31 days for our friends at, let's see here. Let's line them up. The Maryland Lottery, Goodwill, our friends at Window Nation, and our friends at Restaurant Week and Restaurant Association of Maryland will tell you September 16th to the 25th. We're going to be out saving dough, supporting local restaurants, but I'm going to be doing that all month long, starting with our friends at Conrad's and our sponsors here in Towson. Later on in the week, we'll be making our way west to Frederick and to Rocky Gap and to Deep Creek and making our way back through Hagerstown. Luke Jones is making his way to Owings Mills each and every day. He did not make his way to Cincinnati over the weekend, but Luke, it is amazing with all this excitement around the Orioles that the people who turn a Cincinnati weekend into a vacation. I've only done that the last 27 years with the football team. Weather usually stinks, and sometimes the football even stinks in Cincinnati. But an interesting weekend to go. See teams you don't see this weekend. They're going to have a homecoming here. Why against the Pirates? Clearly, whoever makes these decisions was not around in 1979 or 1971. But in regard to baseball, you go out, you take on a weird sort of trip. A lot of fans went, and I saw that. You and I we bent our elbow in Cincinnati on occasion as well. But fans went out there and took advantage of that, much like the Chicago situation a couple of weeks ago to go see the Cubs.
They did, and I think a big part of that is not nearly as much about the Orioles playing well. I think it's much more about the fact that you don't get a chance to see the Orioles play at the Great American Ballpark in the same way that they hadn't been to Wrigley Field in several years. So you have some of that. Certainly, it helps that they've played well, but to put the focus back on what's happening on the field, a disappointing weekend going up against the Reds, who I will acknowledge had a pretty good month, and they have played the likes of the Yankees and some other AL East teams well. So it's not as though the Reds, you just look at their record and say, oh, they're awful. They have played better of late, but we've talked about this with the Orioles since the 10-game winning streak. We knew that they had the 10 games against Tampa, to finish up the All-Star break, and then Yankees and the Rays in Baltimore coming out of the break. So they went 5-5 over that stretch, and you're saying, okay, 5-5. Now you start this stretch against the Reds, against the Rangers, and against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Well, you go out to Cincinnati and you lose 2 out of 3. And with the trade deadline looming Tuesday, 6 p.m., it does make it more difficult to kind of look at this team right now and say, since the 10-game winning streak, where everyone was excited and it felt like they could do no wrong, they've gone 6-7. That's not awful. And the ebbs and flows of a 162-game season, it's really not all that notable. But if you're Mike Elias,
get them where they want to go.
But if you're Mike Elias and you were looking at this thing from and everyone knows this was unexpected. No one thought this team was going to be at 500 on the first day of August. So if you're trying to weigh what to do at the deadline, if you're trying to weigh whether to stay the course, whether not that anyone has been suggesting that they go all in or anything like that at the trade deadline, but just, what do you do with Trey Mancini? What do you do potentially with Anthony Santander or Jorge Lopez or Dylan Tate or Joey Crable? Go down the list of their relievers. What do you do with all those types of guys? Ramon Urias, let's throw him into the equation after having a good July, but when you go out to Cincinnati and you lose 2 out of 3 and you're back to kind of hovering around 500 after the 10-game winning streak, it's where I look at this thing. And, I've said to you all along, I still very much am looking at this through the lens of next year and what you can do to put yourself in the best position to really seriously start contending next season. And that doesn't mean I expect them to win the division, but to not just be talking about a team that is 1 game under at 500, or they got to 2 games over 500 with Friday night's win with the big 9th inning against the Reds.
That's exciting to this fan base, though.
It is.
I mean, it really is. I mean, it's a different thing than I had Tampa people on all. I mean, Andy Freed came on. If you haven't heard that, he's a Baltimore guy, the voice of the Rays. And, they've been above 500 for 15 years, it feels like, right? Other than a little piece when Joe Madden left, they've been very good. Nobody there gets excited about that. In a baseball town, to have that kind of a winning streak here, to spur this on at a time when Rutschman's coming, at a time when Hall might be here, at a time when Rodriguez should have been here, right? Means and all that. This is a nice little palate wetter, and I know you and I have talked some Ravens football here this week, and we'll get on to that, but this is a little palate wetter for football season that I don't think people are coming to their winter carnival and buying season tickets next year and all that, but this is going to be on the tongue of fans in a way that it hasn't been in a number of years because this wasn't a one-off thing. This is the beginning, as we said from the very beginning, of hope. I don't know what else it is, but it does. You don't go from this to 100 wins immediately. Maybe you do. Maybe you do next year. Maybe they get some pitching next year. Maybe all things like the Cubs did that year, just all kind of comes together at one time for them. But this gets people excited, and it gets them back down to the ballpark. And the place is going to be packed this weekend, right? I mean, like, no matter what, they're going to have a weekend that if they have a big win, they have a walk-off on Friday or Saturday, it creates the thing that 2 weeks ago did, which is 35,000 people went down there and had a moment that they want to go back for. That's what brought me in 79. With the Cincy's hit the home run, I'm in for life, right? That's what they're trying to do with the next generation. And having big wins this weekend, as much as, like, they can finish 79 and 83, but if they win on Friday or Saturday when people are there, that creates a memory for people. And I think that that's something that's so lacking for them. We sit here and talk about Delman Young. What's the other thing? Other than Delman Young, there's nothing. Curse of the Andino, you know what I mean? Having nights and having moments and having Oriole magic, to me, is the best you can do when you're not going to win the World Series. And they're not going to win the World Series this year.
Yeah, and that's fair. I guess for me, it's just the point I was trying to make about the trade deadline is you have to, you can't fall into the trap of not being able to see the forest for the trees, in the sense of, yes, this has been fun, but there's still a long-term goal at work here that Mike Elias, he can't be overly sentimental about what's happening right now. If the right deals present themselves to improve your situation next year, improve your situation the year after that. And it's not to say that I expect that we're going to see some monster sell-off, but I'm guessing if we're going to see trade deadline activity, it's probably going to be something that hurts right now in the immediate present, more so than something that's going to excite you for the rest of the season, right?
I mean, a seller, not a buyer.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And again, this was, as I said all along, for me, I'm still far more excited and far more looking forward to seeing DL Hall, potentially seeing Jordan Westberg or maybe Gunnar Henderson before the season's out. I'm seeing Kyle Stowers, and hoping he gets every day at bats. They called up Taron Vavra this week, but he hasn't played a whole lot. But he's a guy that I kind of projected to be more of a utility man for them anyway, if he's going to work out in the major leagues. So I'm still much more of that frame of mind. But again, this club did have the opportunity to really force Elias's hand. If they win 10 in a row right before the break, if they had gone 6-4, 7-3 against the Rays and the Yankees, and then they go out to Cincinnati and sweep the Reds, then boy, now you're talking about a team that is 5 games over 500. So we didn't see that. And again, that's not a major knock, but at the same time, if we're going to say that they're turning the corner and they're for real and they've got a shot at this thing, then we need to stop grading them on a curve if we're going to talk in those terms. And that's where
to beat the bad teams too. That's part of this, really.
Exactly. So that's where I'm not, that's not me being doom and gloom. That's me giving them credit as a credible baseball team and saying, hey, this was a missed opportunity over the weekend to go to Cincinnati and try to take 2 out of 3 at least, and they didn't do that. So
the players think they're in a pennant race, right? Brandon Hyde's treating this way. They're not. This isn't a pretend season for them. They're in this. Well, they really are in it. I mean, sure. Say what you want. I mean, when I admit they're in it, dude. You know what I mean? Like, they're in it. 3 games off the wild card in July, you're in it. You have a chance for the first time in a long time to do something to play October when you have another team in the playoffs. I mean, all of these things have conspired. Maybe they're fool's gold. Maybe it's false hope, whatever it is. But I don't know. I've watched this team play. I mean, last week you were bragging about all the positive numbers since Rutschman came up and what their record is. They lose a couple of games. I don't know. It's pretty typical. To me, it's the next 10 days. It's always the next 10 days. It's always okay, sweep the Pirates then. Beat another bad team. Beat a different bad team.
Yeah.
Beat the Rangers. Beat some bad teams here.
Yeah, and that's fair. I guess it just, it goes back to what expectations are at the deadline, understanding that, they might, the next time you and I are talking, we might be talking about Trey Mancini being a Met, or we might be talking about Dylan Tate being traded to another contender, so that's where I just want people to have the proper expectations. And that's not to say that you're doing cartwheels about whatever potential prospects they might get for whoever they trade. And I understand people aren't going to be excited about that. And look, with Trey Mancini, I mean, we saw, you and I haven't had a chance to talk about what was just a crazy, very memorable moment. I mean, you were just talking about Delman Young. As memorable moments go, Trey Mancini's inside the park home run, whether it was actually a home run or whether it should have been scored as an error on Mo Gabba Day, was pretty special. I mean, that was a cool moment. In fact, John Harbaugh was even shown the highlight of that right after his press conference in Owings Mills. Mancini had done it 45 minutes before that or so, and all Harbaugh could say was, wow, wow. I mean, he was just blown away by it. I mean, it was cool. So whether that was Trey Mancini's final moment at Camden Yards or whether they hold on to him, and we'll see how the last couple months of the season go. We'll know very shortly, and you and I will reconvene and we'll summarize what happens at the trade deadline. But looking at this team right now, 6-7 since that 10-game winning streak. They lose 2 out of 3 to the Reds over the weekend. But the big takeaway, as well as they've continued to play, their offense really, other than a couple guys, I mean, Rutschman has swung the bat very well. Santander had the big series against the Reds. Urias, until the last 5 or 6 days, had really swung the bat well. But Mountcastle, sub 200 average in July. Hayes, same deal with him. Trey Mancini has been okay average-wise, but not a lot of power shown. So, Mullins has been okay. Mateo's actually been pretty good. Rougned Odor, as much as we talk about the late inning heroics, he has not done much of late. Nothing at all of late. So they're really not swinging the bats all that well. And Sunday was a great example of this. They go 0 for 6 with runners in scoring position. The bullpen has a little bit of an off day, backing up Austin Voth, and they lose a very winnable ball game. So that's where, as you go into August, and regardless of what happens at the deadline, if this team's going to hang around and continue to play meaningful baseball well into September, they need some of these bats to come alive. It just can't be Adley Rutschman. If Santander is still here, it can't just be those guys kind of leading the way. And that's kind of what we've been seeing here of late. They really need Mountcastle and Hayes especially to get going. I mean, those two guys really, really struggling.
Well, the games they won, the bottom of the lineup's been hitting the ball better, right? Literally.
Yeah, I mean,
runs at least, big hits.
Sure. I mean, Urias, and we have seen Mateo swing the bat much better for him. No question about that. But you need some of your middle of the order guys to get going, right? I mean, it's been some of them, but again, going into Sunday, Ryan Mountcastle was hitting 191 in July. Going into Sunday, Hayes was hitting 198 in July. They each collected a hit on Sunday, but they need those guys to get going. Those are two guys that you're counting on, not just right now, but moving forward. So again, that's not being doom and gloom. That's looking at this team in terms of, if we are going to talk wild card, what's happening on the field right now and what needs to get better. So, the rotation, you and I talked about it. Tyler Wells, we now know a grade 1 oblique. Where does that put him in terms of getting back on the field? Do we see him maybe best case scenario late August? I think it's probably more September. And then by then you're wondering, where is the club? Where is he physically? Where are you with him innings wise? As far as when he comes back, how does that look? So
it changes everything for August too, for every fifth day, for what they thought they had 2 weeks ago. And I know there was an innings limit and all that.
Sure.
But you still want to see him get out there and take the ball, and that's not going to happen. So that's 3 pitchers down now, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, where does DL Hall fit into this? Where does Kyle Bradish? And Bradish came back and pitched. He was okay on Friday night. That was good to see because, we saw the potential for him earlier in the season when he had that phenomenal start against the Cardinals, but it was really a struggle for him after that. So you'd like to see him get back on track. Maybe we see Bruce Zimmerman at some point here between now and September. I mean, but I'm looking to see DL Hall. I know he has, you look at the walk rate, and the control is not probably what you'd like to see for a guy coming to the majors, but my goodness, look at the strikeouts. Look at how he's dominated Double-A. I mean, at some point, this guy needs to start finding out how he stacks up against major league hitters and being in a major league rotation. So, again, trade deadline. Once we get on the other side of that, I'm much more looking forward to who are you bringing up? Who's fitting into this picture for the rest of this season? Because again, the DL Hall, Kyle Stowers, whether you bring up Westberg or Henderson, and I'm not saying those guys are definitely coming up, but if you do, to me, it's all about getting them acclimated to hit the ground running next year. And then 2023, you can go into a season where you have expectations. Again, to your point, not saying that you're expecting them to win 95 or 100 games, but I think you can really look at if you have a fruitful offseason and you turn the dial a little bit in terms of spending some money and acquiring some talent to augment this roster, that you've got a team that you're looking at as a wild card contender. And that's the whole point of this, right? All this losing of the last 4 or 5 years is to get to this point now where you're starting to talk about this team in real terms again. The fact that you and I can talk about the fact that a late July series in Cincinnati was disappointing, right? That losing 2 out of 3 was disappointing. We wouldn't even have been talking about it, most likely, had this season kind of gone as
they lost 2 out of 3 regularly for a long, long time.
yeah. So, and we would have just been mentioning it we would have been exclusively talking about who are they selling? And that would have been the extent of the conversation, right? Who are they trading off?
It's been fun with Trey Mancini.
Yes. Yeah. So and
it has been fun. And by the way, I think he's going to go, right?
I think so. I think what's tough about this trade deadline, and look, this isn't just the Orioles. I think look at the Orioles' biggest trade chips from an offensive standpoint. It's who? Mancini and Santander. If you're looking for, if a team's looking for someone that has a little more club control. Well, if you're in the market for Trey Mancini or Anthony Santander, you're at least, I would assume you're at least calling Mike Rizzo down in DC and asking about Juan Soto, right? So Soto is holding this up, I think, in so many different ways, not specifically for the Orioles, but just in general. When you're talking about a generational talent, you're talking about a guy who, even in his early 20s, is the kind of guy that to this point in his career looks like he could be a Hall of Fame player if he continues to do what he's done. So I think that's held some things up. And has that held things up for the Orioles? Well, we'll find out. We'll see if a deal comes into place for them with some of these guys. But those big chips, I think everyone's holding out for those, to make that major deal. And if you don't make that major deal, and maybe the Nats hold on to Soto, I mean, we'll see what happens here. But that's when you can be in a position, if you're Mike Elias, if teams start to pivot, maybe you'll get a team that doesn't get Juan Soto, and suddenly they're saying, "Oh, well, we need an outfielder. Let's go get Santander. He swung the bat really well for the Orioles," and they're potentially get in a position where maybe a team is a little more generous with their offers. So we'll see how it plays out. But again, the fact that we're able to talk about a series that had meaning in late July, and we're still talking about the trade deadline, and it's still much more of a mindset of selling. Although I've said all along, I think you should still be looking at deals that could help you for next year. I think whether it's you're getting a near major league ready prospect, or maybe you take on a contract that another team's trying to get rid of. So I'd still like to see that, although I'm not holding my breath on that kind of a deal being made. But it is a lot more fun talking about this in those terms rather than just a team that's 35 games under 500 and we're talking about them exclusively selling, and that's all they're doing. So we'll see how this plays out. And again, we'll reconvene here sooner rather than later, and we'll see exactly what moves the Orioles have made, or maybe it ends up not being a very active trade deadline for the Orioles. I mean, the last couple of years, I think, last year, they ended up trading Sean Armstrong, who was at AAA, and they traded Freddie Galvis. I mean, we didn't see, a Mancini or a Santander move.
There's no Jeff Conines or BJ Surhoffs going, or Mike Bordix, who just friended me on Facebook. Thanks, Bordy. Being dealt off to the Mets or the Braves in contention, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I still, Santander could be a really nice piece for somebody, but Mike Elias isn't just going to give them away either. So I think that's where, again, what are other teams offering? First of all, does someone land Juan Soto, and then by the cause and effect relationship, do the teams that fail to land him, do they get a little more desperate? And that's where you have a chance to take advantage of it.
You got you. This will come out after the trade deadline, so you can embarrass yourself, or you can look like a superstar. Padres, what do you think?
I am going to say,
like to spend.
I don't see. I think he's going to stay put. In all honesty, I don't think they're going to move him because I don't know. Not that the Nationals are going to hold on to him, because I think at this point, you look at what's happened where They've lost Harper. They've traded Trey Turner. You go down the list of guys that young players that they've either let go or traded away. I think they'll hold on to them, but I was just seeing something early Monday morning. Don't count out the Dodgers. I mean, can you imagine if the Dodgers get him too? When you look at who they already have, and they signed Freddie Freeman in the offseason, and go down the list of stars they already have. Mookie
Freddie
Betts.
Freeman doesn't even want to be there. He wants to be in Atlanta, so let's send him back, and you can take Soto's salary on, because that's part of the gig at the top, right? If you're going to take him on, you have to think about who might get rid of for the luxury tax, right?
Well, I mean, it's also just who are you giving up to acquire him, and how much money are you going to have to give him? Now, he's not a pending free agent, but I mean, the reason why the Nationals are trading him is because they don't feel that they can sign him, or they aren't willing to give him what he wants. So that's where it is fascinating. But my official prediction will be that I think he stays put. But I'll go with the Dodgers just because, my goodness, can you imagine that? How about this? Can all Orioles fans agree on, as long as he doesn't land in the AL East somewhere? How about that? I mean, if he winds up somewhere else, fine, but don't want to see him go into the Yankees.
It seems like
right?
the guy the Red Sox would give $500 million to at some point, right? It seems like that's the way they've been playing the ball lately.
I mean, you would think so, but at the same time, I mean, the Red Sox are, they're going to be sellers, right? I mean, that's what we think. Although, again, we always think of these in such black and white terms: buyer or seller.
He's not really a rental; he's a rent to own.
That is
different,
right? I mean, he's the kind of guy that you acquire, and I've also seen I've also seen some pundits suggest, what about the possibility of someone like, say, the Dodgers acquiring him to go win another World Series, and then they flip him in the offseason, and they end up recouping better than whatever prospects they traded to DC for him. So, I think that's an interesting scenario as well when you're talking about a guy who's not just a 2-month rental. So, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, it's fascinating. But again, bringing it back to the context of where the Orioles are with the deadline, I do think there are a lot of players that are kind of in that holding pattern. GMs are in that holding pattern with a lot of players because they're waiting to see what happens with Juan Soto, especially if you're talking about the Orioles case where, you're talking about a right fielder and a DH, corner outfielder, first base type that, any team, right now, if they're aiming for Soto, they might be looking for a consolation prize if they can't land him. So we'll see how it plays out for the Orioles, but should be a very interesting couple of days here as they now turn their attention and go down to Arlington to take on the Rangers.
All right, Luke's going to be out in Owings Mills doing all things Ravens this week, waiting for the Orioles to get back against the Pittsburgh Pirates. As long as I don't hear Sister Sledge and We Are Family, I'll make it through. I'm actually heading toward Pittsburgh. There's a rumor I'll be out in Oakland and Cumberland and Deep Creek Lake, as well as just all those mountainous areas, Frederick, Hagerstown, doing all that over the weekend. Orioles are celebrating 30 years of Oriole Park at Camden Yards. Luke can be found, Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those cool places, as well as myself. I'm doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our partners at Goodwill, Window Nation, and the Restaurant Association of Maryland, reminding you Restaurant Week is September 26th, or 16th to the 25th, I should say, and coming up, crab cakes and beer and football and baseball. It's what we do. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.